on this sessions online wherever you are placed. It would be good if you have certain questions. You may want to post them on the chat box in the link that you have joined. It may not be possible for us to have you ask the questions directly, but if you post them in the chat box, then we can, take them up as and when we go, as and when we can do so. So thank you so much and welcome once again, all of you who joined here and the online guests also. Okay, so moving to the next session, which is essentially a showcase session, which is about unpacking nature-based solutions, and talks about the existing models on nature-based solutions, issues and challenges. I think some real work that has been done on the ground, how it has fared, what have been some of the issues and how they can help us, solve some of the climate change issues facing, especially in the context of smallholder farmers. I have pleasure in welcoming Sudha Singh, who's the founder of Purpose Room. Sudha would help us and moderate and take this session forward for us. Sudha is an expert in equity and inclusion, sustainability and strategic communications with over 30 years of experience advising C-suite leaders across multinationals, governments, and NGOs in India and the UK. As founder of the Purpose Room, she helps organizations assess risks and opportunities in diversity, equity, and inclusion on one hand, and environmental, social, and governance strategies, which is ESG on the other. So she's a fascinating mix of a person who's had considerable experience working both on the corporate sector and on the nonprofit side. And I think she's worked with various communities, including a large focus on women and gender equality. She has therefore helped design impactful interventions and craft authentic narratives. As I mentioned, a strong advocate for women in leadership, she also hosts the podcast, The Elephant in the Room, which I have also had the privilege.
Thank you, Sudhir. And good morning, everyone, to the audience here. Our previous speakers have really set the stage, and I think it was very interesting to see the, the juxtaposition, the balance between someone like Amarjit Sinha and then Mr. Sundarajan speaking from a perspective of a energy company. And I come from the lens that I think I bring is looking at the equity and inclusion lens when we are talking about climate or when we are talking about communities and how we can ensure that, when we talk about a transition, because this is all about India transitioning or the world transitioning, climate mitigation, how do we ensure that there is a just transition and that the communities are a part of the solution rather than, solutions being designed in advance by countries or by companies and then being, sort of them being forced to do something. And those, of course, are not sustainable ways of doing any work. So just to set a little bit of context, I think everybody has spoken about NBS. So we know that India as a nation is recognized for its, biodiversity, varied ecosystems. And we stand at a very, very critical juncture where we are confronted by the pressing challenges of climate change. 2024, like Mr. Sundarajan mentioned, was when we crossed the 1.5 barrier. We'd been waiting for it for decades, and then we finally crossed that barrier. And what does that mean for the community? Does it bring more urgency? So we are the 7th most vulnerable country to climate-associated risks. And that, sort of propels India to think more innovatively towards sustainable development demands and innovative and effective solutions for climate mitigation. This brings us to our current discussion on unpacking nature-based solutions, existing models, issues, and challenges. Like we've heard from Mr. Sinha, nature-based solutions are increasingly acknowledged for their potential to mitigate climate change impacts while promoting biodiversity and ecosystem health. We have a lot of programs. He spoke about NREGA. There are coastal resilience projects and that are creating and those that are creating carbon positive food systems. The NBS provides a multifaceted approach to address environmental and social challenges, and specifically, we are speaking about smallholder farmers here. So I think that that is one of the best things for them. India's ambitious targets to achieve net zero emissions by 2070 underscore the urgency for adopting NBS as a viable option for offsetting greenhouse gas emissions. Again, this is about balancing India's need. As we have our prime minister often speaks us about us becoming a 6 trillion economy, and at the same time we have the climate, what do you say, disaster that is waiting to hit the entire. It's not waiting to hit. We've already been impacted. We can see it in climate events, extreme climate events like rains or flooding, fires, forest fires, etc. According to, I'll just quote a PwC report, which says that ecological restoration through planting native species and rehabilitating degraded landscapes stands as a crucial strategy with the potential to capture nearly 205 gigatons of CO2 over the next century. So in this session today, we will explore various models that are already have been worked on by some of our partners and some of the people who are on the panel who will be speaking about it. And our esteemed panelists will delve into their firsthand experiences, discussing the tangible benefits these solutions will bring to smallholder farmers and impoverished communities. They will also shed light on the hurdles that they have encountered, because everything is not everything is not like 100%, and success is not ensured, is not guaranteed. So there are solutions and there are challenges that need to be overcome, and they will offer their insights and recommendations for investors, policymakers, and registries, and of course, all the people in this room. So I will invite all the panelists to come and sit here. And we will start our conversation with Kasturi Navalkar. Our panelists are Rohini Mukherjee, um, Swapan Mehra, Kasturi Navalkar, and Satya. Okay, do I need to say your full name? Satya Brata Acharya. So we'll start off with Kasturi. We are running a bit late, and I'm going to be a strict timekeeper. So we are going to start off with Kasturi. A quick introduction to Kasturi. She leads partnerships and strategic collaborations at Value Network Ventures, supporting social enterprises, nonprofits, and communities tackling the climate crisis. Kasturi drives nature-based solution initiatives in coastal resilience, sustainable agriculture, and low-carbon technologies, collaborating with 102 partners across 15 countries. She has actively participated in multiple UNFCCC COPs and was featured speaker on nature finance and methane mitigation. So welcome, Kasturi, and I will leave the with the presentation.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with the esteemed panelists and as well as the keynote speakers. I think they really set the stage in context. And since I have only about 8 to 10 minutes, I'm going to be a little comprehensive and quick. But thank you for the introduction. My name is Kasturi, and I am the head of partnerships at Value Network Ventures, primarily a project developer and on-ground implementer, but also a funder of climate resilient programs, specifically low carbon technologies, where we at VNV make it our mission and vision to make markets work for adaptation. Now, you must be thinking how these two go together. Mitigation and adaptation, even at high level events, are normally seen as separate or segregated concepts. What we have realized over the 2 decades of experience that we have in the carbon world is the only way that we can achieve, say, permanence and longevity in these programs is making mitigation technologies and mitigation financing work for adaptation with communities. This is a little bit about BNB. I won't spend too much time here. We're present in about 15 plus countries. We've been in the market since 2007. And we have over 5 million hectares under our land use management. Since this session is focused on nature-based solutions, a lot of the slides that you will see here are on removals mostly, rather than avoided deforestation, which means afforestation, reforestation, and sustainable agriculture and land use management. These are the thematic areas that VNV predominantly works on. Blue carbon, community forestry, and climate smart agriculture takes up a very large percentage of this portfolio. Although clean cooking, waste management, energy access, and biodiversity and conservation, and other innovative technologies are also an important facet. So these are the 4 pillars that we actually look at as a primary project developer, right? Making markets work for nature-based solutions. Financial inclusion, financial transparency, which was touched upon in the keynote speeches as well. Increased economic opportunities on ground, and absolute transparency of how the revenue flows from investors and from the upfront funding budget to the carbon revenue sale at the end of the cycle as well. Livelihoods, we have a specific livelihoods arm at VNV, and we believe that this should be centric to all carbon project developers, because at the end of the day, as it was touched upon earlier as well, the communities and the frontline people are the custodians of this land. We are merely facilitators and project developers, but the local knowledge is held by them. And it is their practices that we need to consider as nuances when we develop these projects. Transparency, of course, and equity across creed, gender, religion, and ethnic minorities. A little snapshot of the impact of nature-based solutions. So the reason why I am displaying these numbers is to emphasize on the significance of impact at scale. We have a lot of, especially in India, we have a lot of genuine efforts that are being carried out and have been carried out over the last many decades. Nature-based solutions is a term now that's trending, right? But we've been doing it with tribal populations, with indigenous populations, local NGOs, grassroots organizations for decades now. The point now is, how do we cohesively and collectively come together to make that impact at scale? A little snapshot: blue carbon, which includes mangroves, tidal marshes, seagrass, and seaweeds, but predominantly mangrove afforestation at VNV. We have planted about 75 plus million mangroves over 80,000 hectares in 9 different countries. But with that big figure, only 5 to 10% is in India. Now, there is a need in India to enhance this effort and do it at scale, whether it's in partnership with the forest departments, with community body organizations, with women self-help groups, joint liability groups, gram panchayats. There are real use case scenarios that are waiting to be added and integrated into models that are financially inclusive and that have the power to actually unlock these opportunities. Community forestry or social forestry, also known as agroforestry with smallholder farmers. These are initiatives, again, that are on community land. This could also be privately owned land, or in India, which is most of our portfolio, in association with the forest department. So I think a lot of that has been touched on in terms of management of nurseries, in terms of monitoring, plantation and maintenance. There are employment and local opportunities across the board for these community members, not only to be beneficiaries, but to actually be the decision makers and drive the change that is going to impact not only their generation, but the generations to come. In terms of climate smart agriculture, and now I want to focus actually on how greenhouse gas emission as a metric or carbon markets as a metric uses the ton for ton concept, right? Which is carbon credits removed, carbon credits reduced, or carbon credits generated from avoidance. How is that revenue, or how is that translated into actual adaptation efforts or community initiatives? Moving forward very quickly, of course, these are the international standards that we work with. This is from the voluntary carbon market, but we also are focusing on the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism, the PACM, which was formerly known as Article 6, which is also a very stable market that drives down risk and stabilizes costs as well of carbon credits. Just a snapshot of some of our portfolios, a little bit about BNV, and as a project developer, how operating responsibly, growth not at the cost of sustainability, as you had mentioned as well, and reporting transparency through high integrity and high quality projects, therefore translating to high quality carbon credits, is absolutely important. One of the things I think on our prep call as well that we talked about is land ownership, right? And transparent benefit sharing. Now, this is a very nuanced discussion, especially in South Asia and Southeast Asia. And I want to bring in some learnings from Southeast Asia, even though we're India focused here, on land ownership. A lot of these lands are inhabited by communities that trace back generations, and they have land use community rights. Are these documented as Katha papers or as property papers? Unfortunately, not so. But there are now initiatives coming in, for example, in Indonesia, where we have a mangrove afforestation project of over 13,000 hectares, right? We've already planted about 6 million mangroves, but all on non-concession, non-forest, but state land. And these are all fragmented communities that have been directly impacted by the climate crisis and starting even before the tsunami of 2004. So how do we establish a flow, a transparent flow of the carbon rights from the communities that are actually doing these activities, or the landowners, which is the state or the provincial government, all the way up to a project developer or a project proponent such as VNV, and then to the investors, then to corporates for high integrity net zero retirements. So this is something that we're actually working on capacity building with these NGOs, with the grassroots organizations and communities. So now you see that this goes beyond just how many carbon credits for how many years and what's the carbon revenue. This is establishing permanence on a generational level where the land use titles, not only the land use rights, but the land titles are also being officialized by the government and recognized, so that future generations, instead of out migrating because of this dilemma, can actually use this land with pride and earn a dignified income, right? There's a revenue stream that's set up for them as well. GIS-based mapping of restored sites. So this is another thing in terms of DMRV, or digital monitoring, reporting, and verification, that can actually be used at the forefront of carbon projects. How do we use digital MRV, which is the use of innovative technology, but also ground truthing, where you're employing local populations to collect that data, report it in a streamlined manner, and thereby increasing their capacity to integrate into a market-based scheme or a market-based system. Now, this is the important part, and I think this will also be the concluding, part of my presentation, which is the social impact of NBS. We all talk about how communities should be impacted, right? And how it should feature into the benefit sharing mechanism of a carbon project. It shouldn't just be ton for ton. How are we doing this? Are we doing it qualitatively and generically by saying, yes, some amount of the revenue, or being vague about it? Or are we actually quantifying the impact and adding metrics to and indicators to the social impact that we're creating? So as project developers, not only are we funding this aspect, but we're also producing an ROI, but not a conventional ROI, a social return on investment, which is an SROI report, which actually has metrics and indicators to tell you how many hours has it saved women from collecting firewood and using chulhas to actually transforming to, say, electrical cook stoves or to improved cook stoves. How much of a revenue are you building in a community development fund for the education and health of communities in the Sundarbans who don't have access to hospitals and no infrastructure? So these are the aspects that actually can be monitored, tracked, and thereby reported even to investors for the sake of transparency, but for the larger sake of a socio-economic inclusivity, right, in the projects through the carbon markets. These are just some snapshots from some of our projects. I'll just run through a couple of case studies very quickly. So this is a mangrove project which involves PPLOs or private participating landowners in Uttar Kannada or north of Karnataka, which focuses on sustainable fisheries, which focuses on women-led FPOs and livelihood transformation for local groups. This is Indonesia. So like I said, it's in India focused. This session is India focused. But Indonesia has been at the forefront of the epicenter of the climate crisis by tsunamis, by natural disasters such as floods, etc., which we are still addressing and mitigating through an ongoing carbon project. How do we do that? We do that by making the community members at the center and at the forefront of the decision-making process. Indonesia has Ibu Baka, means mother mangrove, has, like I said, land use titles that are not clearly defined, with the entire national policy and regulation bringing obstacles and stops to the process. We're overcoming that as well. But I still choose to believe that this project is a success because over a period of 40 years, what we're going to see are not only ecological conditions improve, where you have mangrove forests as barriers to future tsunamis, which are inevitable. We can't deny that. But also communities being led by women, young women, the future generations as well, with enterprises that will have digital marketplaces and market linkages to international markets, even from small villages of Java, Aceh, and North Sumatra. Another project, which is a community agroforestry project, Trees for Livelihoods. This has a target of planting over 60 million trees in the central belt of Madhya Pradesh. The woman that you see on the screen here, bottom left, she was a former national hockey player who has come back and now is the first generation earner from this carbon project to her village community and leads women-led self-help groups to actually integrate into a carbon project, right? How does social inclusiveness actually feature in? This is how. Some of the other projects that we have internationally, Tanzania, Bangladesh, I would have loved to, go a little bit deeper into it. Climate smart agriculture, methane mitigation, alternate wetting and drying. India is one of the largest exporters of rice. We have one of the largest central belts of rice production. How are we leveraging the markets, mitigation markets, by not only quantifying the methane that we're reducing by climate smart practices, but how are we working with governments to introduce subsidies for, say, warehouses, crop insurance, right? To really make this incentivized for the farmers to want to do this, to want to be a part of these projects. I think I'll end with a couple of project insights. So one from the Sundarbans, which is a mangrove project. Here, I'll leave you with a little story of a group of women called the Tiger Widows. So in Sundarbans, and I'm sure you all have all heard of the infamous story of the human-wildlife conflict that is continuous and is happening. There are a group of women who have been, very large group of women who have been widowed because of the fishermen being attacked by tigers while on duty. Now, they still have to support their families. They still have to send their children to school and educate them further. So how has a carbon project featured into this? With the carbon revenue or the sale of the carbon credits, we have collectively brought together these women and now are marketing premium mangrove honey called Bahamo through aviaries, apiculture and apiaries, and helping them in not only packaging, but doing the actual labor, but marketing and being the front face of this product. These products will then be digitally marketed on a marketplace in Europe and will be sold to retailers to be placed on the shelves of European markets and gourmet food stores. Now, on those bottles, you will see a QR code because this is not something that is just exotically produced and exotically marketed, right? There's a story behind it. And each QR code has the story of the woman who has produced and collected this honey. So this is the power of carbon revenue if used appropriately, right? Indonesia, I've spoken about a lot. Just leaving you with food for thought, all of this is possible. But the main challenge, and I think this was in our summary of asks and presentations as well, what are the challenges and what are the problems that you've been facing as a project developer? It is funding. And we should not be shy or apprehensive to say it, right? A project like this, if you want high integrity, if you want high quality, and if you want to see community benefits, if the standards also demand permanence, we have to have an upfront investment or a risk investment, which VNV does take bootstrapped as well, into these projects and understand where this is going through. Now, the carbon markets have earned a sort of reputation for non-transparency, or where are these funds going? How are you monetizing them? How are you, indicating that these metrics work? Costs and financial upfront investment are one of the challenges of project developers. But that being said, I think it is this incentive to see communities, to see women and children being put at the center of project development that bridges the nexus between social impact, philanthropy, blended finance, and adaptation, and how mitigation finance can actually be leveraged and channeled through to realize impact at scale. With that, I'd like to conclude. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Kasturi, for that very insightful presentation. I think some of the key takeaways, just a couple of lines, on the land ownership lessons that you'll have learned, I think we can definitely learn lessons from other countries. And, about integrating local communities into the carbon markets, that's like there's nothing wrong with that. That's a very credible sort of aspiration to have. The SROI indicators I'd be very interested to understand is who is like defining those indicators. Is it being defined by the market? Is it being defined by the communities? And just from a point of view as somebody who works in this thing, greenwashing also, is you have those things about honey that you said and you're selling it in the marketplace. Are you thinking about the carbon footprint of that product? Yeah, that's great. Brilliant. So moving on from that very interesting discussion from an organization that has worked for a couple of decades, we have Swapan Mehra, who's the founder and CEO of Iora Ecological Solutions, which is a leading Indian environmental advisory firm advancing climate action through nature-based solutions. With deep expertise in climate policy and environmental finance, Swapan has pioneered innovative nature finance and community resilience initiatives. A World Economic Forum Young Global Leader and Donella Meadows Fellow, Swapan serves on several national and global advisory boards. He has authored over 40 publications on climate finance and biodiversity, RED, and ecosystem service valuation. He holds an MBA from IIFM Bhopal and a master's in public administration from Harvard Kennedy. Welcome to the podium, Swapan.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the Cognizant team for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. And it's actually great to see that there is a packed house here and there are 40 people online. It shows that there is always emerging a new interest in nature-based solutions, which is one of our primary goals as practitioners in this space. So very quickly, a little background about Iora. Iora Ecological Solutions is a decade-and-a-half-old company based in Delhi, and we've been focusing on nature conservation and restoration for that whole period. We've supported the conservation and restoration of close to 10 million hectares around the world, working with government, civil society, large international funders and donors, and of course, increasingly with the private sector. We have about 100 people team, which works across project development and investments, structuring new financial products, but also a lot on policy engagement. So we've had an opportunity to work with India on defining the NDC goal, the net zero strategy for India on nature. I was a co-coordinator of the green credit scheme, which of course hasn't turned out to exactly be what we wanted it to, but is in work in progress. We are also now involved with the Global Biodiversity Credit Committee in defining a new instrument called biodiversity credits. Our effort is to be able to connect our experiences from the ground with policy and vice versa. That's something that we try and do in the nature space. So I think that a lot of the background of what I wanted to present here has been covered. My presentation has sort of three sections. One is the obvious need and trends in terms of NBS investing. The second is a couple of case studies from Iora. And then the third is sort of a summary slide that I've tried to put across today this morning in terms of the key challenges and areas that we all need to collaborate on towards promoting NBS. I think that we've all agreed that climate change is a reality. The financial burden and the social burden of climate change is here. Nature-based solutions. By the way, before I go into the details of my presentation, I do want to highlight that the definition of nature-based solutions, as is agreed by most international organizations, is the IUCN definition that we all refer to a lot. The IUCN definition says that nature-based solutions are solutions to sustainably manage natural and modified ecosystems to deliver value to humanity and to conserve biodiversity. So I think it's very important for us to note that while carbon finance is a dimension of achieving sustainable nature-based solutions, the goal of nature-based solutions is much larger, and the avenues of implementing nature-based solutions are very comprehensive. And that's something very important to remember. I was reminded of this in the first meeting today, in the first presentation by Mr. Amarjeet, when he mentioned that while we take this view on nature-based solutions now as being private investments in carbon, the scope is much larger. We all have to also collectively remember that our goal has to be to use the impetus of the carbon market, which is a phenomenal institution, right? Many of us struggled for close to 2 decades to get recognition of nature projects in carbon, because when this started out, this whole market, there was no space for nature credits. So it's a phenomenal achievement, but how do we use that as a conduit to influence the broader sort of nature sector and nature investments? So that brings me to the fact that nature is center in terms of India's strategy for climate change. India has many targets related to nature. We have a big NDC target. We have a land restoration target. And we also have a traditional target to increase our tree and forest cover to 33.3%. Mind you, it's actually remarkable that given our population and given our land area, we still have about 24% land under forest and tree cover. It's nothing doesn't mean we should rest on our laurels. There is a lot more to do, but there is something that we have to learn and teach the rest of the world from our experiences. Benefits of investing in NBS. I think that this was been explained that there is a lot of co-benefits. NBS can deliver a lot of jobs. It can deliver a lot of economic growth and can deliver a lot of climate risk resilience. NBS financing is a major challenge around the world. There is an analysis which shows that globally, only 14% of nature-based solution investments come from the private sector. In case of India, this is even lower. It's close to about 10 to 12%. So public finance is the major player in nature-based solutions. And I think one of the things we are all trying to address is that how can we remove bottlenecks to increase more private financing for nature. It's also known that nature-based solutions are the only sort of sector which can allow us to reach all of our NDC goals. There is a very famous paper which says a third of all mitigation outcomes around the world can be achieved only through effective investments in nature-based solutions right now. I think I'm not going to go into details in this, but it's worth highlighting that carbon markets is one of the instruments to actually promote nature-based solution investments. It's at least a very interesting sort of trim tab, which can help pivot a large amount of initiatives in this space. There are two kinds of markets. It's worth mentioning this because India just launched its regulatory market. Ravi mentioned this in the morning, the CCTS. And the CCTS also has an offset component. And there is already methodologies being developed for nature projects. What's also very interesting is that the India CCTS is very clearly one of the few regulatory schemes in the world which has clearly stated that you can develop offsets, trade them in the national market, and you can sell the surplus voluntarily to international buyers. It says so clearly in the rules, which is very encouraging. India also has a new market called the green credit market, which actually is a very interesting initiative to have a non-carbon instrument, which is also where a large part of the world is headed to. Some of you might have read about the Brazilian Fund for Nature that was launched after the last COP, in which there is an effort to mobilize $500 billion completely not pegged on carbon. The whole idea being that there should be pegged on per hectare of habitat conserved. And then you are able to then draw out as measurement outcomes, biodiversity, livelihood, carbon, and then report them separately. So this is some two interesting things that India has done. But India also is the largest supplier of credits from the voluntary market right now. It shows the vibrancy of the sector, of our communities, of our laws, and in general of the legacy that we have of a very strong civil society and private sector in this space. We still have a long way to go. I think I've already mentioned this, that we have to quadruple our investments in nature, and the voluntary carbon market, which is what primarily is an instrument available to us right now, can go a long way in helping us catalyze that capital. So very quickly, since very little time, I'll just quickly run through some of our case studies of work. So we at Iora take a landscape view to conservation and restoration, where our primary goal is to identify vulnerable landscapes which have one of the following issues: high vulnerability to climate change, dependent communities, issues in terms of wildlife mobility and corridor degradation. And then once we identify these corridors, we come up with sort of scientific plans to restore them. Our planning includes detailed geospatial analysis of fragmentation, of habitat loss, of degradation, of carbon loss, evaluation of ecosystem services. So we try and analyze what has been the current and the past valuation of ecosystem services. And then we sort of come up with the investment matrix, which includes carbon finance, biodiversity finance, livelihood finance. And we also very predominantly try and look at leveraging public finance, because we still feel that that still is the sort of the largest pool of capital, and how we can unlock that makes a lot of sense. This is one of our sort of sentinel landscapes where we are working in Meghalaya. I was mentioned in the morning. We have a partnership with the government and with the Meghalaya has autonomous councils which run the community institutions, also have autonomy on land. So we are working with them to restore 150,000 hectares of land. We've already onboarded about 30,000 hectares and carried out restoration activities. We are working closely with the communities through community councils. We have a benefit sharing program where we ensure that 80% of all revenues from carbon are given to the communities, which are reinvested in terms of development of processing of NTFPs, processing of forest produce, etc. One other interesting thing is that we are just about to announce a first sort of carbon-backed, non-collateralized loan, which will be a new instrument that we've been working on for the last year for this project. We also have a program in which we've been trying to look at waste as a means of land restoration. So how can you use urban waste to create organic inputs for land restoration? And in this regard, we have a gold standard program in which we've distributed 40,000 biogas plants with the key goal of accessing slurry to invest in improving land quality. One of the other examples that I want to give, and this is an interesting example because this is an example of a corporate partnership for land restoration in a corridor with communities, where we are working with the Tata Group, and we've identified the coffee and the tea corridors of South India and the northeast of India as vulnerable landscapes, where there is a lot of challenge in terms of very high chemical use, fragmentation of mobility of wildlife, mostly elephants, and also degradation, resulting in poor livelihood for small tree growers, small coffee growers. So we are working together with Tata and on both the landscapes, and we've done restoration of about 30,000 hectares already. And the goal is to expand this to about 200,000 hectares, in which we use the channels of Tata for sustainable procurement to give a premium to certified tea and coffee in estates which are carbon neutral and have more investments, have more green cover, tree cover, less fertilizers, etc. I'll actually just I think one thing to emphasize that just like VNV mentioned, we also take a view that whenever we go into a landscape, you have to have a bouquet of sort of investment interventions, which can not only be carbon, it has to be livelihood development, it has to be value chains. So we don't work ourselves. We have a network of partners that we do this with. And then secondly, we also look at emerging finance through biodiversity. That's something that we are very focused on and we are trying to influence. We're also going to do a first pilot of a biodiversity credit sort of issuance in India very soon in one of our landscapes. So key considerations and issues based on all our years of experience in the land sector, in the land-based mitigation sector, in the nature sector. So I have just 7 points, and if you give me time, I'd love to go through these in a little bit of detail. One is that land tenures and titles vary. Land tenure clarity is a major challenge in developing countries around the world. And while we have systems right now in which we are able to, through certain documentation, certain contracting, capture the right to access land, these systems are not foolproof. There is a lot of work that needs to be done here because there is a challenge that you are accessing land and accessing the rights to the land which are not actually well established and which have been transferred to you unfairly, even though you don't intend to. I think this is a very major issue. Digitization of land records is a non-existent feature in many parts of the developing world, and we need to be careful. We also need to understand and be able to progressively distill what tenure and title we want to use and what we want to leave behind, because land tenure has multiple facets. It has tenure of tangibles, tenure of intangibles, tenure of property value. So this is very critical. What are we rewarding and how much are we rewarding, and is it commensurate to be able to claim the ratio of titles that we are, is something that we have to think about. The carbon market is going through a phase in which there is a lot of changes and there is emergence in terms of eligibility criteria, accounting principles. And some of these principles are challenging for many of us to understand, to apply, least of all our communities and our local organizations, local NGOs. And I think that we need to all collectively work towards pushing forward for more clarity on these and also reform of some of these principles. Some of these principles are also designed keeping in view a certain kind of project and don't apply globally. So I'm on a committee now which is revising the gold standard afforestation methodology. There's 4 of us. And some of the issues that we discuss a lot are, for example, this issue of dynamic baselines, right? Where does this apply and where it should not apply? The issue of prior biomass in sites. So, if you do a project in Europe or the US, you can have a very stringent condition of prior biomass, which you should not remove or which should not be removed. Does the same condition apply to tropical countries like Colombia, Brazil, and India? Because in our case, if you leave a land parcel barren for 2 years, there will be biomass. It might be weeds. It'll also be woody biomass. In Meghalaya, it's such a high rain and fertile state that if you leave a shifting cultivation land for 1 year, you get large trees, makaranga trees. Now, these are invasive trees. But in current methodologies, you can't remove them because you have to justify, you have to account for them. That takes away a lot of your carbon. So how do we treat all of these issues? How are we able to address this is very critical. Standards for MRV are fast evolving. A lot of the standards, there is a lot of talk about digital MRV. We also work a lot on digital MRV, machine learning-led monitoring, but standards don't accept these. Are these to our advantage? Are these not? We also have to really, really analyze this. What we want to push through, just not because it sounds interesting, it should be cost effective, it should be viable. Benefit sharing and carbon right transfers are under increasing scrutiny. This is an area in which there is no regulation, but we need to self-regulate because this is one of the things which is getting a lot of criticism, and rightfully so. There are several instances reported now where 50 to 60% of the carbon benefit is actually taken by developers. These are non-sustainable projects which might not last on any scrutiny in the future. And as regulation comes in the ministry, we are in a committee in which we are trying to say that the ministry CCTS should also have regulation on benefit sharing. It's very difficult because it's a market-led function, but how do we determine this? There is still a challenge of long-term pricing. One of the major issues of raising investments for a lot of these projects which require a lot of upfront financing is how do you value your future carbon asset? And this is an issue. It's actually an interesting issue because there are many other sectors which have actually overcome this challenge, right? You can finance real estate development based on future rent rates, which are unpredictable. But there is appreciation of that in the financial sector. So I think a large part of this is to move towards regulated markets where there are long-term curves. But I also think that we all collectively need to inform and educate the financial sector as well. that this is an asset which has value. Otherwise, what we all end up doing, which many developers here have done, is that you end up selling forward all your carbon assets at a very discounted price, which is unfair to communities. Not only is this maybe slightly unethical, the other challenge is it's also non-strategic. In a country like India or any other developing country, if you've sold forward your assets at an X value, and tomorrow there's news that the value is 10X, what do you think those communities will do? They are not going to continue to work with you. So I think this is something that we need to address. My final point is that we are not at the moment, we need to evolve tools to analyze, we are able to analyze the cost benefit to some extent of the land use. But we need to also factor in the cost benefit of land itself and the opportunity cost of land when we are designing land-based mitigation projects. There are several considerations that we need to have in this regard. First is the value of land is changing. The value of land is relative across generations, across different owners. How will that impact the future of your project? The second issue is how to strategically plan land use. In a country like India, when we were doing the long-term strategy for net zero for the government of India, we had a lot of debates on this with various organizations that you cannot recommend in a country like India that you will divert half of your agriculture land to agroforestry, because you still have to produce food to feed 1.5 billion people. So what is the opportunity cost for that individual, for society, needs to be taken into account when we are planning to use our land as an asset for mitigation, because end of the day, you are providing from that land a service to industry which is emitting. So at what cost to other services from the land do you want to do that is very important. And I think this is something else. I think that if you have clarity on many of these things, then it'll be easier to access capital at scale as well. Because right now, many of these issues prevail as confusion in mind of regulators, in mind of financiers. And this is one of the reasons why the progress is slightly slow. Thank you very much. I'll stop there.
The questions for later.
Yeah.
We'll have to raise the slide of questions, but I think the limit of time.
Yeah. No, not a problem. I think they're very, very important. So we move to our next panelist, Rohini Mukherjee. Rohini is head of global partnerships and strategy, and she brings over 30 years of experience in the development sector, beginning with 14 years as a grassroots organizer in rural Bengal. At Nandi Foundation, she led rural operations and large-scale data collection initiatives. In 2018, she co-founded Archipel India, a regenerative food systems enterprise focused on improving smallholder farmer livelihoods and building carbon-positive food systems. She holds a master's in social work from Delhi University and a PG diploma from the University of Cambridge. Welcome to the podium. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to Cognisphere for giving me this opportunity to speak. Time is short, as we have been told since yesterday. So I'm going to keep this. Okay. So Archipel is an organic regenerative agriculture enterprise. The focus, it came into being in 2018 and it was built on the almost 2 decades of work of Nandi Foundation, which was also focused on livelihoods of smallholder families. And it has always been, for us, the focus has always been the farmer family rather than the farmer, because as we all know, when farmer families own very little land, it's the entire family that's working on it. And earlier speakers have also mentioned about the fact that the woman in a farmer family is kind of an invisible, unpaid labor. For us, in our work over the 2 decades combining Nandi and Archipel, the focus has been to bring her up front, and she's like a equal participant in all decisions and all training programs and everything. Our commitments are to 3 sectors. One is to the farmers. The second is to the consumers of food, of agri-produce, which is actually all of us, the 1 billion people we have in our country, and to the environment. So when it comes to the farmers, farmer poverty, it has been the focus of our work of how we can address that. So on the one hand, it is inputs in terms of training, of knowledge transfer on organic regenerative agriculture practices and principles. And on the other hand, it is also access to markets, even going to the point of ensuring buyback of whatever they produce at their doorstep in a remote village. Unless we do that, our years of experience have shown us that that is probably the biggest disadvantage that a smallholding farmer family faces. Quality of produce, everything that we eat, that all of us eat, is it good for us or bad for us, is a big question today, and we try to address that in our work. And for the environment, regenerative agriculture, our commitment is to that. We have a very experienced team that heads that, and it's backed with science. Often when you say organic regenerative or any, there are so many names that are going around for agriculture that doesn't use chemicals. I think a well-defined sort of methodology over there is also required. So our method of agriculture, in fact, we feel is not only is there no use of chemicals, but it's biological processes, microbes within the soil that are the focus and what we build on enriching. And particularly, there are many advantages, but what I would like to draw your attention to here is this particularly useful and effective for rain-fed areas. A lot of our smallholding farmers who live in poverty, are living in rain-fed areas in our country. And we feel that there is a need to find out more and more agriculture methods and practices which are suitable for that. Carbon sequestration, actually, which happens due to this kind of agriculture, holds moisture. It kind of multiplies the soil's moisture retaining capacity 1,000-fold. So therefore, that's one of the many reasons we feel this is a must for when we are working with smallholder families. Our model is extremely community-based. I'm going to leave you to read that. I'm going to not read out everything here. But what I would like to add is our operations are large. The current archipel project that we are doing is 33,000 hectares. The Nandi work that we have done in the past works with 100,000 smallholding farmers. To implement such projects, we lean heavily on the community. We've spoken, all the speakers today have spoken about involving the community, participation of the community. For us, our work would not have been possible if, so for example, for the current 33,000 hectare project, we have a core team of full-time employees who don't belong there, who are experts in what they do, who are managers, who would be about 20 people. But we have close to 4,000 community people who are working in different capacities, whether it's GPS tracking, whether it's village level training, whether it's engaging farmers and farmer registration and FPIC consent taking meetings. All these are things that are required in NBS projects. So that is a very, very strong element of our model. And farmer groups. So we have we work with tribal farmers here in this region, the Araku region, which is in the Eastern Ghats, on the Andhra-Orissa border. Completely tribal, very backward. When we started working there about 20 years ago, it was very backward. Things have improved, but it is still not where it needs to be. So farmer groups, farmer cooperative, the cooperative that we sort of initiated in 2012, I think. We felt it necessary at that point because I spoke about buyback for farmers. We realized when you're working with smallholding farmers, each farmer is producing however good that produce is, it's very small and no buyer is going to be interested. So aggregating farmers into a cooperative there or farmer producer groups or any kind of organization, that's also an important feature of our model. So these have been our non-negotiables so far. And in this whole sort of journey towards addressing poverty amongst smallholding farmer families, we have tried as Gandhi Foundation, also as Archipel, we have tried various funding models, various revenue models. Currently, we find the nature-based solution model to be the most effective and which is helping us stay true to our commitments, which is helping us abide by our non-negotiables as well. So that for us at the moment for Archipel is the road forward is nature-based solutions. And when we got the invitation for this, when I talked about debottlenecking nature-based solution sector, it was of particular interest to us. So in our nature-based solution work, this slide is an attempt to classify, and there's obviously a lot of things going on when you're implementing such a project, but we've classified these into inputs and resources. So inputs and resources is, we have, I think Mr. Sinha this morning spoke about biofertilizers and biopesticides produced on a large scale. We do that. So we have time-tested, very effective models of producing these inputs on a very large scale.
saplings over time. Between Nandi Foundation and Archipel, we have planted 48 million trees. So we have developed a good experience in sourcing good quality saplings, understanding how tall they need to be when you plant them and so on. Sustainable knowledge, as I described to you earlier, the most of the people who are working in our project are the local tribal farmers, men and women. And the training, they themselves are trainers, master trainers, and they train the villagers. Training goes on in a sort of, round the year basis, because every training in every month is customized to what the crop in that month requires. So we are not telling the farmer what he needs to do during harvest when he's planting the crop. So it's like that. And so having this sustainable knowledge transfer, the reason I've said sustainable here is that this knowledge stays with the community. So while we are sequestering carbon, I like to believe we are also sequestering knowledge on practices that are very important for farmers to come out of their poverty. And monitoring and support, again, is a very large portion of what we do. This is essentially to make sure we are doing justice to the investment that is going into the project. This, I think, is my last slide. I should get brownie points for that. And so on the map over here, you see the Eastern Ghats project is what we are doing currently. Our investor is Shell NBS India. And this partnership with Shell is working out so well, because I think in terms of what we want for the farmers and in terms of the basic principles, commitments, and non-negotiables, there is an alignment. We have found in the past that these alignments, sometimes in the beginning, you are in a hurry to get going and you think you'll sort it out later, but that's not a good idea at all. So that's working really well. As we go forward, these are the areas where we would like to start working. And we are already in the process of doing feasibility studies, etc. That's the Terai region on the sort of India-Nepal border in UP. In the Vidarbha region, Vardha, we have already been working in not nature-based solutions, but we working with the farmers since 2015. And so now we want to morph that into a large-scale 20-30-year project. Punjab is also, we have worked with farmers in Punjab. People kind of raise their eyebrows when it comes to Punjab and organic regenerative agriculture, but there's no time now, but we'd be happy. So our effort was there just to see, we're happy to make mistakes, but we want to try out things and see what works. If I work in the Eastern Ghats, which is 20 years old, and we've had that much time to build trust with the communities, etc., we want to apply that model in other places, but we don't want to take 20 years. We want to see how so Punjab is also in our, and the numbers you see over here are specifically for Archipel. These don't mention numbers that Nandi Foundation through their nature-based solution projects have done. And one of the sort of asks in our presentation design was challenges/issues. So going forward for us, the journey is definitely in the area of nature-based solutions, mostly agroforestry and sustainable agriculture. And having said that, that's not easy. And there are a couple of points already. I think the previous speakers, Kasturi as well as Swapan, have mentioned points that I'm looking forward to discussions on later in the day today. For us, there were a couple of points I look forward to discussions on. One is, as already mentioned, the requirements of the methodologies and the registries. If they can be made more sort of, feasible, doable for large-scale projects. I mean, our current project will soon have 40,000 farmers. So everything that is required, how easy or how difficult is it to do for 40,000 farmers? Doing it, I mean, when it's a rule, you have to do it. But sometimes I feel the time, effort estimation and carbon footprints of that also, maybe if we take it into account, some new way of doing that can be done. Second is for India, the taxation story around nature-based solutions, I think still needs to be resolved. Is GST applicable or not? That's a long discussion. As far as we know, there isn't a conclusion or a consensus on it yet. The third is the areas where we work, and mostly by character, nature-based solution projects will be implemented in backward areas, very poor areas, etc. Such areas are also likely to be in the government's focus for infrastructure development in the coming years. So how much is the land that we are getting into 33,000 hectares in this current project and more in other projects. How much of that land can we foresee 20, 30, 40 years, nothing is going to happen? I mean, it's a kind of a sort of a Damocles sword, like you want that development to happen, but at the same time, you've committed all that land to a certain project and methodology and carbon sequestration. So where does that go? The last one is, I spoke about our organic regenerative agriculture practices, and given the country that India is, Swapan also mentioned there's forest right now, 23-24%, I think, and there is a up to 33% is the aspiration. While planting trees and, ARR projects are the most, how shall I say, I don't want to say lucrative, but in terms of how much carbon it can sequester and how much time, that is on the top of the list. But there's only that much area in the country available for planting trees. Like he said, we still need to grow food. The organic regenerative agriculture principles and practices for growing food, applying them over the rest of the 75% of the land in India has huge climate benefits. Somehow there can be methodologies that can recognize that and encourage more of that. I think we have a good sort of future story for us as a country and the food we eat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rohini. You really kept your time. So our last speaker is Satyabrata Acharya, and he's the director of Cognisphere, the host for the event today. And he's the co-founder. He leads Carbon Finance Rural Livelihoods Initiative at Cognisphere. Since 2022, he has secured $120 million in forward purchase commitments for CSL's NBS projects and implemented a plantation model spanning 6,500 hectares across 3 states, planting 7.5 million trees. Very commendable. With over 30 years in rural development, Satya has spent 3 decades at Pradhan, where he developed strategic partnerships and was a part of the corporate group overseeing program integration and multi-state projects. He holds degrees in agriculture and plant pathology. Welcome, Satya. We can see on because you're hosting the
Thank you so very much. So I will come straight to our NBS case, the nature-based solution case, which is about promotion of plantations of Tasar host trees in the privately owned wastelands. So let me also take you through, what is Cognisphere, what are we doing, and and in which areas we are currently active. So we are a public limited company. All my other co-panelists, they are pretty experienced in this sector. We are a new company. It's 3 years old, established in 2022. 2022. CSL works with a vision to bring in. So the whole idea of setting up CSL. So we are, all the promoters, we were actually working in Pradhan for many, many years. So the whole inspiration to set up Cognisphere was to basically explore other avenues of finance. So to see that, if we can actually create some window of finance and can actually, bring in those finance on a large scale to the remote areas. Again, the whole idea is to work with smallholder farmers, with marginalized communities. CSL, our team combines the expertise in community mobilization, that's where we have come and, started our Cognisphere. We have so far brought in 9,500 hectares of land owned by smallholder farmers. And so far we have planted 11.50 million trees. So we have kind of a secured finance for, planting another additional 25,000 hectares of plantation in, by 2030. So that's the kind of, that's our scale currently. And I would also say that by 2040, all these plantations are going to sequester nearly 10 million metric tons of carbon. So in terms of carbon sequestration potential, I would say that, because we are growing these forest trees, the potential is very large, and it's also going to be quite fast. So the Providing a little bit of background information, I would also like to say that, focusing on why these wastelands, I would say that 20% of India's lands are actually in varied states of, degradation, uncultivable, many a times, completely barren, completely wasted, etc. So these lands, many a cases, these are owned by local communities, and people living in these areas, these kinds of lands, they're highly vulnerable to the climate change, the effects of climate change. And especially these lands, you can see, very large swaths of land, you can see that, places like Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, the hilly undulating central Indian, plateau region where you have very large concentration of tribal communities living there. And they are pretty disproportionately, affected by the climate changes. So I would say that so we are focusing on central India and eastern Indian plateau region, trying to work with smallholder and marginalized communities in order to see if we can build, help them to build better resilience in the face of, climate uncertainties. I would also like to say that, as I say, I continue to say that, many a times, it could be the uplands and the degraded, uplands, fallow lands, they constitute nearly 40% of the land holdings of, poor farmers, smallholder farmers. And agriculture is actually limited to, small strips of valley lands where people grow, mainly, continue with subsistence agriculture, fully rain-fed, paddy monocrop centric. And agriculture doesn't actually, ensure food security, year-round food security and income security. So because of that, many people, they are pushed to migrate to different regions of the country. And I would also like to say that, people are so poor in many cases, they do not have the wherewithal to reclaim this kind of, soils. And because of that, and, also because of the climate change, these kinds of lands you can see that, are increasing. So how do you actually restore this kind of lands? That's, something which is a kind of a major challenge. The other part is also about how do you make these lands, a kind of a productive utilization of these lands so that, people are paying taxes for these kinds of lands, getting nothing. So from that, how do you actually help them to produce, something which is more rewarding, something which is more sustainable? So you can see these kinds of landscapes, very, I would say sometimes you feel like, standing in front of oceans of wastelands. You can also see the extent of degradation. The topsoil is completely washed off. It's very difficult to find a kind of a good soil profile of 2 meters, 3 meters. So that's the kind of, situation there, and people are actually living on these lands. And these lands, as I say, because these are left to fallowing and sometimes, only open for grazing, these lands are actually, getting increased more and more. So that defines our purpose of, we are inspired, CSL is inspired to work with local communities to restore these kind of, large tracts of degraded lands, promote productive use of these lands to create robust livelihoods. That's something which the kind of challenge that we have taken on. We, as I say, that, the whole purpose is focused on, working with smallholder farmers, building their resilience and creating alternative streams of, livelihood and livelihood revenues. We looked for innovative and scalable solutions to restore landscape and create livelihoods. And as I say that, with all these, good ideas, you still have the understanding is that, you require funding, and what is going to be the source of funding to meet the high cost of, restoration of these lands on a very large scale. People talk about MGNRDGS, people talk about Rashtriya Krishi, Krishi Vikas Yojana, people talk about numerous government schemes. I would also say that, so we have tried our best, to mobilize large scale finance from the MGNRDGS and some other schemes also during our Pradhan years, with varied success, I would say, and creating very high quality asset and, going for comprehensive restoration work. it requires a kind of a very stable finance. So, finance that comes in, allocation based and comes in dribs and drabs, it's very difficult to really create something which is, meaningful to the local communities and can actually impact the livelihoods. So the whole idea is that, need for a model that works both for the farmer and the investor. That's where we actually look for other and the alternative avenues. And this, whole idea of exploring the carbon finance world actually came into our mind. The idea is that, you require a model. There is absolutely no doubt about it. So you have farmer on one circle, the other circle is the investor. Farmer has land, labor. Land is fairly degraded, as I say. You have labor, need for dignified livelihood. That's something which is important. And the investors, they have the funds, they have the carbon offset obligations because they emit, carbon dioxide, etc., through their business process. And they are looking forward to investment opportunities for offsetting carbon. And the other part is that, more enlightened investors, private investors, they have also aspirations for, attainment of different kinds of SDG goals. So now if you can actually bring these together and, start working on, strengthening the interface and expand this, interface, you can see that, the intersectionalities, you can see that, because of the investors fund and the farmers land and labor, etc., you can see that, it's possible to generate sustainable livelihoods, employment for youth, better habitat. That goes to the farmer. The other part is also the carbon credits generated out of afforestation program that can come to the investors, and also the SDG goals attain, this can also, come to the credit of the investors. So if you can actually expand this, intersectionalities, then you can see possibilities that, more and more investors are coming and taking interest in this kind of project ideas. So our model is that our model involves an afforestation project, which is afforestation initiative in privately owned lands with a kind of a tree which actually hosts Tasar silk. Tasar is an indigenous silk which is grown extensively in the central and the East Indian Plateau region. Now, Tasar host trees are plentifully available in these areas. These are native trees, very robust forest trees, terminally Arjuna, terminally tomentosa. This is a mix of tree species that you can grow and that can actually offer and expand habitat, for Tasar sericulture. Once established, the landowners can use the plantation from fourth year. From fourth year, the land becomes ready for the plantations, become ready to host Tasar silkworm. And because these trees are so robust that, they can continue to take up Tasar sericulture for the next 60 years. So at least 2-3 generations, it can actually support. And people can actually earn quite handsomely out of 60 to 70 days of, intensive work in the plantations. Nearly 1 lakh rupees from this kind of, lands where people were just, paying taxes and, gaining nothing. To that, they can actually gain, about 1 lakh rupees or so, and which itself is, quite rewarding for the local communities. These trees can grow in depleted soil and wonderful sequesters of carbon. So that's something which, we have realized at a much later stage. As trees sequester carbon dioxide, over a long period of time. So that is why most of these, afforestation projects built around this kind of tree species are to be for a very long period of time. So 30 to 40 years duration. And that's where, Ravi also, talked about the challenge that, the investments are all front loaded. Much of the investment has to come for, planting trees, raising trees, soil treatment, soil husbandry, land husbandry, etc., irrigation systems. But at the same time, the break even actually comes on 14th or 15th year. So that's something which you require patient capital and investors who would be interested in this kind of, outcomes. Participation of local communities, especially of the women, is in it to build, strong community stake and the sustainability of the model. And last but not the least, and most important thing is also about that very high rate of tree survival of almost 90% through and through, consistently up to 30 years is something which is very important, and very good growth of trees. Yeah. So coming to the collateral benefits to enrich the local communities, we would say that this whole effort is to establish a sustainable and more rewarding land use system, transforming the land from fallowing to a kind of a plantation based land use system is important. The farmers will earn on an average of about ₹1 lakh from 1 hectare of land every year for next 50 to 60 years. This actually, this income gain actually leads to food security, income security, and well-being of the households. Rural women to be empowered to lead the revitalization process, restoration of degraded landscape, augmentation of water table, all that stabilizes the farming in the lower reaches. Revival of biodiversity is something which is going to benefit the people in multiple ways, increased availability of food, fodder, and other biomasses. And I would also say that, carbon benefit sharing with farmers to build their long-term stakes in the project. Just show you, a kind of a picture of transformation. This is in 2022. Not a single blade of grass you can see in this kind of lands. To next year, you can see this covered with, forest trees and lots of grasses emerging. To now that this is, completely covered under canopy, and you can see people growing different kinds of intercrops, pulses, oil seeds, etc. So this is quite striking, the way, nature actually revitalizes itself. I would now focus on major issues and challenges. I would say no repository or guidelines for project development with respect to specific agroclimate and specific mix of tree species. These are all left to subjective interpretation. This is something which is, definitely, quite a difficult proposition. Second part is also about many of our previous speakers. They also talked about ascertaining land ownership in absence of updated land records. The land records in places like Jharkhand and Madhya Pradesh still in the name of great-grandfather. So how do you ascertain that this person is currently now owning the land and would be the legitimate owner of the carbon credits? So that's something which is important. Gaining consent of the participating farmers to deploy their lands for 40 years. That's something which is now, so because of the registries and other things, because of the methodology demands that. So this 40 years of land deployment is something, and especially in the context of India, where you have numerous smallholder farmers, there is a kind of a high pressure on land, and high pressure on changes in the land use. So land use is going to change in the next 15-20 years, maybe because of government infrastructure projects, or because the local communities would like to see that they bring more and more lands under agriculture. So that's something which is also to be considered. So gaining consent for 40 years from the local community is something which is quite a difficult proposition. There are innate risks of the project, natural factors, forest fire, change in land use, shift of priorities of the landowners. Today, the landowners might be interested in planting trees, but, because of Tasa sericulture, there will be enhanced income. Children are now well educated. They may not be interested in plantation, may not be interested in Tasa sericulture. So that's something which is, there is a definite, shift in the priority. As such, the safety net is pretty weak for both investors as well as the project proponent. We need to understand this also. So sometimes, we can think about a kind of a blended finance, that even the investors also making this, investments, it is basically for public good, basically to impact the environment, etc. So how does the government also remain alive and aware to these issues and see that, the project, goes the other way? If it fails, in that case, there is a kind of a safety net provided by the government. Considerable ambiguity in the extent of applicability of direct and indirect taxes. One of our session would be actually then dedicated to that. So very considerable, ambiguity exists, whether applicability of GST or direct tax, etc. So this is the last slide. Appeal to the investors and policymakers, make the protocols and guidelines of registry more implementation oriented, keeping ground level challenges in mind, conduct more workshops and training, on NBS project development, policy advocacy around ease of business, policy advocacy to clarify government's stance on taxation, deliberating on better and updated options of monitoring, reporting, etc. So we talked about different kinds of, digital monitoring system. The monitoring system continue to be physically measuring the land, the plants, the counts, the height, the gut, etc. It's quite time taking, quite cumbersome, very costly. More forums, the registry and carbon fees are becoming exorbitant, I can tell you, for smallholder farmers or even medium size, medium scale, farming system would find it extremely difficult. So willy-nilly, you have to have, people who have deep pockets have to actually then, get involved in the projects. More forums are required to understand buyers' perspective around nature-based solution and what they are exactly looking for, apart from the, just the, carbon removal. So sometimes, as I say that, more enlightened, the investors may look for also the other kinds of sustainable goal attainment. So those are the kinds of things which we need to also understand. Thank you so very much for your indulgence. Okay, sir.
Thank you to all the panelists. And in the interest of time, I will just ask the audience for any questions from our panelists, because I think there's tea break that everyone's waiting for. Questions? We've had some fantastic, I think, case studies and from India and abroad, and from all our panelists. Any questions? Yeah, you please, Rohini. Done.
Traditionally done.
Satya, can you hold the?
Hello. So this is a practice which is traditionally done, but because if you just look at the gazetteers, etc., 150 years ago, even in places like Dindori, Mandla, you have lots of terminally Arjuna forest, and those are now degraded, and many cases lands looks like this. So now you are actually trying to revive these plantations, revitalize these lands, revive these plantations, and trying to create and expand the habitat for the Tassa silkworm. So this is an indigenous practice. This is a traditional practice known to the local communities. In certain cases, people continue to do it in the natural forest areas. But right now, what we are trying to do is to promote this, these plantations outside the forest areas. So these are trees outside forest, and that's where people would be able to grow Tassa sericulture. Yes.
Yeah, just a small clarification I wanted to have is
Yeah.
like, is discussion was around NBS, nature-based solution, but what I heard from the case studies is all about tree plantation. So just wanted to know, is it only tree plantation, or you're talking about a comprehensive, what Mr. Sinha was talking about, a ridge to valley landscape? And then there are cost implications also. So that's what I want to.
I think that the NBS as a concept entails a very wide series of activities, some of which have mitigation outcomes, some don't even have any mitigation outcomes. So conserving water bodies, restoring soil, all of that. And then there is also nature-derived energy is also a part of NBS. I think these case studies point you to the fact, which I think Rohini alluded to, that at the moment, there is a very large preference from investors of NBS to look at tree plantation as an activity which gives removal of carbon, which has the best market. Other activities such as agriculture also have a market, but is relatively lesser. and the measurement is slightly more complicated. So that's one of the reasons why you see a lot of tree planting right now, because the demand is highest for this. Then there are adaptation only NBS activities which cannot be monetized in the carbon market. So those have to still stick to only your traditional public finance, etc., because adaptation outcomes are not sold. So you're right. It's not a function of whether it should be done or not. The function is majorly because the demand is right now a lot for removals from trees. That is the best, the value in the carbon market.
So the investors understand that the easiest, I think.
There are 2, 3 reasons. One is that investors in general, there is a lot of interest and consensus that removals are needed right now.
Yeah.
Because you need to reduce what's out there and give time about 30, 40 years before countries are able to go to net zero.
Yeah.
And when it comes to removals, tree planting is considered as the best activity. The other is
Absolutely.
soil-based removals, which is also increasing, biochar, etc. But this is sort of more cost-effective. Other agriculture projects like what she mentioned is actually avoidance. It's not removal.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the reason people want removals right now.
Absolutely.
I was actually about to, sir actually asked my question. Hello, everyone. I am Banashri Thapa. I'm a program associate at CEEW. And my question was exactly that when we talk about agriculture in India, regenerative agriculture, climate smart agriculture is such a big aspect. We need to diversify from rice, wheat, yet the discussions today centered a lot on tree planting. My question is to the panel. I understand that, Swapan, you said that there is an increasing focus on tree plantation. However, even regenerative agriculture sequesters carbon through soil organic carbon. So general question, is the challenge around the difficulty of measuring soil organic carbon because of the impermanence? So let's say a farmer shifts to organic farming or regenerative farming, the improvements in soil organic carbon may come really later. And then how do you measure that? Because soil organic carbon, depending on tilling, etc., may differ every year. So then how do you accrue carbon benefits or climate benefits to those farmers? Is that the challenge that the regenerative agriculture projects are facing right now? And how do we, as a community of stakeholders here, can we do something to kind of address that challenge?
Pretty much what you said, and that's the question I also had for this community. That, on the one hand, more and more agriculture done in a sustainable way is what we need. We need the food, but at the same time, we need to protect the environment and our natural resources. So we seem to have a way of doing agriculture which can help. Now, to be able to do more and more of that, you need money. And then money is currently coming from a source which needs the carbon credits in large numbers and soon. So that's what we need to resolve.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly right. What you mentioned are the reasons. One is the issue of permanence. It's relatively harder to ensure the permanence of soil-based removals versus trees is also difficult, but it's at least relatively easier. The second is measurability. There's a huge concern on measurability. With trees, you still can have a combination of remote sensing, ground truthing. With soil, the only proven methodologies right now are physical sampling. So the cost of measurement is so high that it actually outweighs the gains from carbon in many cases. So that's one of the reasons why it's difficult to do those projects.
Problems of adoption and disadoption. This year, the farmer follows these next year he may not.
Permanence and reversals. I mean, there can be reversals. That's a big problem that investors don't want to take a view on, because today there is SOC enhancement, then removal. It's a challenge.
Yeah.
Just add a point to what you said, that it's all linked, So if the farmer stops doing it, there's a reason. Farmer started doing it for a reason, stops doing it, there's a reason. So in our experience, if first of all, the farmer does it, broadly it does understand it's good for the soil, but also, at least in our work, we are able to link them to their organic certified, fair trade certified, they're getting better prices. So there is that cycle. The moment the market goes away from the farmer, then there is no incentive for the farmer to continue that. So you can't really separate these things. And the complication of measuring it, I wish there could be more metrics rather than just measuring soil organic carbon. This moisture retention, I feel, is a very, very important factor. And that can be not just measured, but monetized, you know what I mean? For it to become a reason why people invest, that would be great.
Thank you. Can we allow some others and then y'all can discuss later? Yeah. Sorry.
Hi, thank you, panelists, for the amazing discussion. My name is Drupad and I work with Mati Carbon India. I had a few questions, a lot of it because of this interesting discussions. First is specifically focused on agroforestry. There are few registries which are, certifying credits for agroforestry, and like Cognisphere pointed out that the project payback periods are very long for 14, 15 years, and it does not attract a lot of financial incentives for investors. So what kind of project payback periods have you seen through your experiences, and what is the minimum project payback period have you seen in agroforestry specifically? My second question is for, aggregating farmers into a cooperative and then selling their produce in terms of organic produce or something like that. How attractive has that been to you, or is it actually getting any traction in countries like Europe, like Kasturi had mentioned, but she had left, I think so.
Yeah.
I just want to know more about that. Is it how attractive it is, and how new players can enter into this kind of solutions?
Yeah. Can we address the first part of the question, and the second
First
part of
part
the
I can-
question, you can just
Sure.
discuss at tea, because we are going to break for tea.
Yeah, sure. No problem.
Yeah. Thank you.
You can actually have a lesser payback, period. For instance, if you grow, let's say, the monocropping of eucalyptus grow very fast. Now, I think that, 7 to 8 years, you can actually, recover your money. The problem is that, uh, our focus is also on community benefits. Our focus is also on biodiversity. Our focus is also on, how it finally revitalizes the soil, augments the hydrology, etc. On those counts, such fast growing trees may not be most useful. On the other hand, the kind of, trees that we are going with, these are native trees. They are very robust trees and has a direct linkage, livelihood linkage with the local communities. So that is the whole understanding. And in that case, we have to actually sit with the investors, convince them that, so the investors have to also understand this, and they also have to appreciate this. And because of that also, this whole kind of, this kind of investment may come where you have a very long, payback period. So that's something which is there in our mind. So both community, climate, as well as biodiversity is a kind of a significant concern in these kind of projects.
Your question is, it depends on many things: site quality, which tree, what's the price of carbon. But like Satya is saying, that if you want a project which has high impact on multiple matrices, you do expect a payback of 10 years and above. Below that will be projects which are purely focused on some sort of a pulp or short-term rotation. And the other issue is that most of those projects are now disallowed under most registries. So if you do short-term monocultures, it's very difficult to get those projects approved under VERA and other registries as well. So that's another consideration.
Okay. So any other questions you all can discuss at tea? We are going to break for tea just now, in interest of time, because we have a session after this. So thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you, Satya and Kasturi is not there, Rohini and Swapan, for a great discussion. Please feel free to speak to them offline. Just a second.
Even as we break for tea, we'll keep it for 15 minutes. I think on behalf of the organizers, I'm saying that the discussions and the panelists will be open to questions even after this session today. So you will have access to them to raise queries and get your clarifications and post that also. Thank you.
Delhi is